Welcome to this fifth session on the book Meeting Life. We had finished with 2 question answers, and today I will begin with the third one, which is about standing against society. Someone asked Krishnamurti a question as to how can one stand up against all the wrongdoing in society. The normal way that people have done this is to revolt against what is taking place. And it's usually a rather violent, angry revolt, like the revolt of the leftists, the Marxists against capitalism, and so on. It changes the outer structure. They did. They created a communist world. But in the communist world, there was a lot of domination and violence. And so the ego just expresses itself in a different way in that structure. Therefore, this is not something that can be done through structural change. So he goes into this question and he asks the questioner, how will you stand up against a society which is corrupt? And then goes on to explain that by corruption, he doesn't mean just one form of corruption, namely bribery or taking money under the table to get things done. But the word corruption means breaking up things. So when you are producing pollution in the environment, it is corruption, physical corruption. The businessman who creates pollution in the environment, saying it is not my job, it is the job of the government to get rid of pollution. I'm merely doing what is necessary for the profit of my company. He is approaching the issue with a lot of self-interest. And that self-interest is corruption. Because you're not thinking of the interest of the whole. You're thinking only of your own interest. You are separating your interest from that of the whole. In the same way, when in religion, a man professes to make a sermon, give a sermon, but he's not living by what he is talking. As for what Krishnaji says is that is also corruption. You are saying something which you don't really mean, because if you really meant it, you would live that way. Not just talk about non-violence, but be non-violent. So when you talk about non-violence, but you are violent, it's a form of corruption. And politically, when in a democracy, a leader tells lies in order to capture votes, which is all going on right now, both in America and India and probably other parts of the world, and using money to do propaganda, it is corruption. Because when you accept democracy, you are accepting the spirit of democracy, which is honesty and humility and the respect for the will of the people. All that is not there when you are acting out of self-interest and cheating. All cheating is done egoistically. In a marriage, a man enters into marriage, he accepts a certain structure. which is involved in that, takes vows for that structure, then cheats afterwards. That is corruption. So ultimately, if you go deeply into it, you will find that ego is corruption. So Krishnaji asks, sir, how will you stand up against all this? Not against just one form of corruption. And then points out that the only way not to contribute to this corruption is not to be egoistic oneself. So you have to learn. And that learning is self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. And without wisdom, you cannot come upon freedom from the ego. And so long as ego is acting, whether crudely or sophisticatedly, you are being corrupt and you are adding to corruption in the world. Though you may take a stance that you are standing against corruption, as most politicians do. In their speeches, they say, we are going to eliminate corruption and so on, but they are themselves corrupt. They are taking money from industrialists and giving them concessions in order to gather power. That's corruption. So the word corruption has widespread connotation, but in society we have reduced it to only bribery or taking money under the table. So he says, you are the world, and unless you free yourself of corruption, you are not ending corruption in the world. Your reaction against one particular form of corruption is also another form of corruption, because your self-interest in, you have self-interest is acting within that. And you can see that all these revolts, whether it was in France or in Russia or in India and so on, have failed. They have not changed human beings. And unless the human being transforms, there is really no change, because the way our consciousness functions is the way every human being functions. And it's the sum total of all these human beings that creates society. So it's not so simple to stand up against corruption. Realizing that many people have taken sannyas. Sannyas means you leave the world and go into the mountains and live in a cave, avoid all relationship, because in relationship there is corruption. And Krishnamurti points out that that's only an escape. You're not free from self-interest. You have run away from facing the world. So the deeper question is, can one live in the world and not be corrupt? That will have its own effect among the people around you, which may be just your family, your children, and so on. But that is more than a lot of propaganda regarding non-violence and so on, without an actuality. That's what the politicians indulge in. But self-interest is acting behind that. And therefore, there is not an ending of corruption. Corruption just takes on a different form. So he points out the deeper issue involved in standing up against society. So that takes us to the passage on transformation, because if the world can only be transformed by transforming oneself, then the next question arises, how do I transform myself? And that is the next question in that chapter on standing against society. Someone asks him, what is transformation? Now I have that question and answer on my screen. So I'll share screen. Prasad, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, so I'm going to re-enter the Zoom. I seem to have gone out
Okay.
without intending to. You will have to allow me in again.
Okay.
Are you able to see my screen?
We are seeing you. We are seeing you.
I should say share. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, we are able to see the screen now. But the screen that we see is Zoom.
Yeah, I know. So I
So,
need to close this screen and go back.
yes. So you can, what you could do is, before you share, whatever
Yeah.
that you wanted to share, keep that open and it will appear as one of the options. So you can stop sharing and then, yeah, you can, after you stop sharing, you,
I
without
stop
use,
share
yes,
and
and
then
open
I
whatever.
open it. Yeah, now I have opened it.
Okay, and now if you share it, it will allow you to, it will give the options of sharing this
But
particular.
now I don't see the place where it says share. I don't see the button which says share.
So that's in your, are you able to see your Zoom window where you are?
Zoom window. No, I'm not seeing my Zoom window.
Yes,
I'm seeing on my screen this passage.
this passage. Okay, so that is one of the windows. So are you able to reduce that window and see, or switch the window?
Yeah, I can reduce it. I can
And
reduce it.
yes, and switch to the window where you have, to the Zoom, where you have the Zoom.
I think
And
last
in
week
that,
he clicked on the blue Zoom
I've,
icon at the bottom.
I've come to it. Yeah, share
Okay.
yes,
screen.
now share screen.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. We are able to see it now.
Sorry about that. I keep making the same mistakes again and again. Why has it disappeared now?
Professor Krishna, can you see yourself?
No, but I can see the passage. Can you see the passage?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I can read it. That's what I wanted to do. Part of the passage is behind your pictures. So I need to move your pictures or minimize them.
Yeah,
Okay.
minimize.
Okay. So is there such a thing as transformation? The questioner asks, what is it to be transformed? And Krishnamurti says, when you are observing, seeing the dirt on the road, seeing how politicians behave, seeing your own attitude towards your wife, your children, and so on, transformation is there. Do you understand? To bring about some kind of order in daily life, that is transformation. Not something extraordinary out of this world. I think he's saying this in order to make us realize that we often think enlightenment is some kind of thing which happens mysteriously under a tree to someone who is meditating and so on. And he's pointing out that no, it is connected with your daily life as you start learning about what you are seeing. So that learning mind is this religious mind. That learning is this learning of self-knowledge, which is really wisdom. When one is not thinking clearly, rationally, be aware of that and change it, break it. Now, when he says change it, break it, we have to understand that it doesn't mean by the use of our will or our decision. We have already said that our will or decision only acts on trivial things. The profound has to come about through learning. So when he's talking of change it, break it, it is through perception, not through will and effort. That's important to understand. That is transformation. If you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower. Change it immediately. That is transformation. When you are greedy, violent, ambitious, trying to become some kind of holy man, see how it's creating a world of tremendous uselessness. I don't know if you are aware of this. Competition is destroying the world. The world is becoming more and more competitive, more and more aggressive. And if you change it immediately, again, you can't change the world, but you can change yourself by not contributing to that kind of attitude of competition. That is transformation. And if you go very much deeper into the problem, it's clear that thought denies love. We have already discussed what love is. It's a form of affection which has no motive. no purpose behind it. It's friendship for the love of friendship, for the joy of sharing, not for achieving an end. So it's free from the ego. Love is where the self is not. Therefore, one has to find out whether there is an end to thought, an end to time. Now, it doesn't mean time in the sense of chronological time. It means psychological time, which comes about when you use time to come upon achievement in the future. Not just material achievement, but psychological achievement. When you say, I will become non-violent 5 years from now, you have given yourself the license to be violent for 5 years. And violence doesn't end that way, gradually. Violence has a cause, and when that cause is eliminated, violence ends. And that cause can be eliminated because it starts from illusion, which is some kind of imaginary construct of your own mind. And when you see the falseness of that and the danger of that, that illusion ends. And therefore the disorder ends. It says, not philosophize over it and discuss it, but find out. It is a quest, it is a research into oneself to come upon deep perception which brings about change, not just intellectual change of opinions, not just admiration for Krishnamurti and agreeing with what he is saying. All that is very superficial. Truly, that is transformation. And if you go into it very deeply, transformation means never a thought of becoming, comparing. It is being absolutely nothing. So, this is the process of self-knowledge. It begins simply with putting your house in order, seeing the disorder around you, the dirt around you, the corruption around you, and ending it through perception. Then seeing competition and ambition, the result of that. So through observing daily life, you are coming upon a religious mind which is connected with daily life, not something separate to be practiced in a temple or a church. That becomes an escape from daily life. So that's an important part of Krishnamurti's teaching, that don't separate this religious quest from daily life. Otherwise, it will become an escape. So learn from observing your daily life, but that requires honesty, humility, which is that I don't really know, and I'm interested in finding out, and freedom from tradition, which is all your conditioning and so on. Otherwise, you will come upon a different set of opinions. And wisdom is not a different set of opinions. It's not a different set of ideas. It is at the level of perception. It is not at the level of ideation at all. So that is what is involved in this transformation. And that is why self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. And you can't change yourself, but the perception of truth changes you imperceptibly. You may not even know that you have changed. You may discover afterwards that, oh, I used to be jealous and I am no longer jealous. It comes as a surprise even to you, because it's the perception of the truth which has acted and not your will. So you don't know that the change has occurred. There's an interesting simile that I am reminded of, which Krishnamurti wrote somewhere else. He said truth enters the mind like a burglar. Like the burglar enters your house, he doesn't know which way he can enter and so on. You are living inside and he enters through a window or through a door which is left open. Truth enters like that. That house in which you are living is your ego, is your conditioning, and truth breaks through the defenses of that and enters. That's an important simile. So it's not through the ego process or through effort of will that you get there. It is through freedom from that effort and that will that you come to it. So freedom is necessary for learning. It's not the other way around. It's not that this learning will bring you to freedom. It is freedom that has to be there. Freedom from the past, from tradition, is the only thing that can bring you to a new perception, which is not interpreted in terms of the old. Because truth is the unknown. You don't know what the truth is. What we think love is not love. What we think religion is not religion. What we think education is not education. So our mind is filled with illusions. And the nature of illusion is that you think that is true. What you know is true when it is not true. So there are a lot of illusions and we are not aware of our illusion. So start with humility. Don't assert. Examine every notion that you have and be willing to drop it if it appears to be false or unhealthy or producing some kind of negative emotions. This is the learning of self-knowledge, and that's the hard work that has to be performed in learning about oneself. So real change, real transformation is a byproduct of wisdom. You can't come upon it without the wisdom. Without wisdom, it will always go wrong. That's why it's not a solution that can be done structurally by changing arrangements or having a different form of government or new laws and so on. All that has been tried countless number of times. Just read history. And it has not ended violence. It has not ended division. Therefore, that is not the way. If we consider, for example, I will stop this sharing. If we consider, for example, right now, there are so many wars going on in our society. Why are we not able to end the wars? After all, within a country, there are different states, different religious groups, different parties, ideologies, but they don't kill each other. They don't have war. And you have made an arrangement to resolve disputes. If you have a dispute with somebody or some institution, you take the matter to the court and you have to accept what the judges tell you. That way, we avoid war and violence within society. Now, why are we not able to do that globally? It would benefit the whole world, isn't it? Half the revenue of every nation goes into preparing for war, keeping an army, navy, air force. who are all engaged in non-productive activity. So immediately we will be twice as prosperous. And there will be so much less cruelty. No, imagine no war in Gaza, no war anywhere, no violence, no terrorism. It'll all end. It sounds so simple, so logical. Why are we not able to do it? Because we are not wise enough. Each one is thinking of their own self-interest. Right now, Biden is thinking of the self-interest of his own election. Therefore, he's saying something that will appease the protesters in the US because he wants to get their votes. But he doesn't mean it, because on the other hand, he is giving aid to Israel and weapons to promote the war. So as they say, your actions speak louder than your words. Now all that is corruption. And corruption is self-interest, is ego. So just see the truth of it. It's our ego, it's our self-interest that is preventing us from eliminating war and eliminating nuclear power, at least nuclear weapons. And we have brought the whole of the earth to such a dangerous point, and we think we are very intelligent, which is pointing out that we have defined intelligence unintelligently. That's not real intelligence. We have considered cleverness at a particular job as intelligence. It's not. Krishnamurti says there is no intelligence without compassion. And he says, put your intellect in your heart. It has no value outside you. Very strong statements. We don't have to agree, but we need to examine what he is saying and why he is saying it. Because all that we have done. Without wisdom, we are using intelligence to produce all these wars and war material. See the destructiveness of it. So that's not the way you can bring about change in society. You can't bring about peace through war. You may think that if you have terrorized your enemy with your power, you have created peace because now he is not going to be able to kill you or attack you. But this psychological warfare is going on, and it will lead to terrorism, and it will lead to individual acts of retaliation and violence out of that frustration. So it's a very limited meaning we give to peace when we say peace through balance of terror. It's not real peace. Peace means no hatred, feeling of affection or friendship. Now, why are we not able to do that? Just because the other people are living in a different area? Just because they have a different color? They eat some different food or speak a different language? It's our narrow-mindedness, isn't it? So long as that narrow-mindedness is there, how are you going to, what kind of revolution will bring about change? Within that new structure, this narrow-mindedness will function again. The ego will function again. That's why throughout history, we have not been able to eliminate the disorder in society or the disorder in consciousness. Consciousness is not separate from society. Perhaps I should explain that a little bit. As a child, you grow up in society. And what is going on around you in society infects the mind of the child. So the child becomes either a Russian or an American or an Indian or Chinese and so on. And he has loyalty to that particular fragment of humanity. That prevents you from having a global mind. A global mind means one that feels for the whole of the earth and all of humanity, beyond humanity, all of life. We are not creating that kind of mind through education. We are creating people who will become warriors, soldiers, scientists who will produce nuclear weapons, and so on, because we are interested in power. We think through power we are going to have safety. But power doesn't bring safety. It brings war. And war is the most destructive thing and something that has endangered all our lives. See that no animal has created that kind of torture and cruelty and violence as man has done. So stop this pride in being human. It's shameful. And all that is because we have never bothered to understand ourselves deeply. We have imitated society around us. So what is outside becomes what is inside. And then what is inside maintains the outside. So there is no difference between our consciousness and the outside. That division between me and society is an illusion. You are society. In minor ways, it may not be. But if you look deeply, you will find that there is truth in this. That is what it means. You are the world. The world is not separate from you. So, he says, whole of human history is a history of becoming. And that becoming is a matter of desire and will and fighting and so on. Fighting with oneself or fighting with one's neighbor. That's why in that passage he says, ultimately it is important to be nobody. Happy is the man who is nothing. See the truth of this. Don't get trapped into thinking, is this practical and so on. Because the way we are living, is that practical? Are all these wars practical? Is this genocide which is going on in Gaza practical? So, we need to come upon wisdom. Without that, it will never solve the problem. One man asked him, why is it so difficult to understand your message? And he says, I have no message. I'm not trying to give you a message. You don't have to understand my message. You have to understand yourself. And you have to work on yourself. You are the book which you have to read, not my book. The purpose of my book is only to help you to read the book which is yourself. And that book contains all history, all human history. If you have the capacity to read and perceive it deeply. Basically, it is because deep down we don't want to change, which is inertia. We have tremendous inertia. We want to continue to be what we are, to be with tradition, to be with our conditioning. And that is the reason we are not willing to change. And you have to see the truth of that and the danger of them. Then there is the chapter which we were supposed to discuss today, which said love cannot be taught. Now, what he means by love, we have gone into it before, is a feeling of affection for everything without a motive, without any self-interest in it, which is a form of sensitivity. We have that, but we destroy it. I mean, nature has imbued us with that, but we destroy it through our own ambitions, our own desires, our self-interest, which is the ego. So, you can come upon love only when you end disorder in your consciousness. Because without that, there is no order. And therefore, there is all kinds of disorder, which is all kinds of negative emotions coming into your consciousness and affecting your thinking and your decisions and your actions. I have mentioned earlier, I don't remember whether in this lecture series or not, his conversation with Scott Forbes when he gave charge of Brockwood School to Scott and made him the principal. He said to Scott, is Scott aware that the seed of intelligence, meaning the seed of wisdom, is there in him? He has nothing to do with it. It takes its own course. It has its own flowering, but he can kill it. Is Scott aware of that? I think it applies to each one of us. When he's talking to Scott, he's talking to all of us. Because Scott is not different from us. It's the same human consciousness. He says the seed of intelligence is there. Intelligence as wisdom, not intelligence as we know it in society. That's not intelligence. And that seed is not able to flower because we have covered it up with self-interest and opinions and intellect. So see the limitations of doing that and get out of this inertia of continuing to be oneself. Order is not a blueprint that you can practice. It comes as virtue in consciousness. Virtue is order in consciousness. It is there only when you have freed yourself of all these negative emotions, which you can free, because disorder is born of illusion, and illusion can be ended through perceiving what is true and what is false. That is why this quest for self-knowledge is important, but we have not cared for it in education. So our brains are filled with thoughts and opinions and knowledge of all kinds of religious things, history and all that. We get hijacked away from understanding ourselves. Finally, he says, social morality is immorality. Recently, there was a High Court decision in India, which was appalling. It said a wife had complained that the husband was torturing her by forcing her to have unnatural sex. So she wanted a divorce. And the court went into it and said, in marriage, there is no requirement for consent of the wife. It's a heinous crime against another human being. You are just using your power to torture her, to get your own pleasure. And the court says, that's all right because you are married. So just because you got a marriage certificate, you now have a license to be violent? Krishnaji used to say, in the name of violence, in the name of marriage, so many human beings perform rape on their own wives, but it is excused because he has married her. That's why social morality is immoral. It is saying you can be rude to her, you can taunt her, you can torture her psychologically, but you can't hit her. If you hit her, it is against the law. We will take action and put you in prison. So social morality is immorality. It is saying a certain amount of violence we permit. Beyond that, don't become more violent than that. And Krishnaji is saying all violence is evil. End violence through self-knowledge. End this kind of use of power and domination. His last advice to me on the deathbed, I remember, he said, sir, don't ever dominate anyone. And don't let anyone dominate you. Both are responsibilities. I said, the first, I promise. The second, I will try. Because I didn't want to promise something which I may not be able to do. The point is, domination is evil. Whether you dominate or you are dominated, the domination is there. The domination is evil. So, not to allow domination, not to allow yourself to dominate and not to allow domination over you. Both are responsibilities. That's an important thing to realize. We think I should not be violent, but others can be violent to me. No, violence is evil. And so you have to stand up against society when society is violent, when it's being corrupt. Okay, sir, I think I have said whatever I had to say about these chapters. Now we can go into questions. There is still time.
So we'll take a
Okay,
5-minute
so
break.
Yes, that would be fine. Much needed. अठावन लोग हैं, 58 लोग हैं।
So are we ready for the question portion?
Sure, sure.
So the first question today is from Dakshina. In one of his talks, Kay says, wisdom is the daughter of truth, and intelligence is the daughter of wisdom. Can you please elaborate?
We said that self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. Now, self-knowledge requires you to perceive the truth, what is true and what is false, thereby ending the false. You have to let go of the false if you are attached to it. The false may be your tradition, your religious belief, and so on. But when you discover that it is false, it's not leading to virtue, it's not really religious. You have to free yourself. You have to drop it. The problem is we are not willing to drop it. So if you really perceive the danger, then the false ends. The disorder ends. And that is wisdom, because the mind that is free from illusion is the one that has wisdom. A mind that is full of illusions has no wisdom. It is living in an imaginary world of its own creation. It's not living in the real world. So self-knowledge brings wisdom, which is through the perception of truth. So that's the connection between wisdom and truth. I think we went into all this during our study. So if you have further question, you ask and I will clarify in my replies. Krishnaji uses the word intelligence to mean what we normally can call wisdom.
So now we have a question from Renu. We have past examples of tribes that lived and followed community living. Cannot this study and reapplying their ways reduce war or limit war? Cannot changing from individuals or small group living approach to community nation groups stop wars?
There are two kinds of groups. There are functional groups like hospital group or school group, which come together for achieving a certain function, namely education of children or treatment of patients and so on. And there are other groups in which one is psychologically investing and feeling important through that and deriving an identity out of it. So these religious groups tend to be that way. You are very proud of being a Hindu or a Christian or being a citizen of this country or that country. That pride is the ego, born of the ego. It is not simply that I was born and I have in this region, which is called India, for historical reasons, and I have a passport from there because that's a legal requirement for traveling abroad. It's not that. There is an identification. This is my nation. I will die for it. Love of the country is different from patriotism. You have to be able to distinguish between the two. Patriotism is an illusion, a division. Love is not an illusion. You can love the trees, the rivers. That's not an illusion. But patriotism, that our country is the best country, and I will die for its defense, and it's heroic to do so, and so on. All that propaganda in the mind, which is thinned into us in education as patriotism and treated as a virtue. You have to see that that is a very limiting thing, a very dangerous thing. That is ultimately leads to war and division and war. So can we free ourselves from that? Doesn't mean you have to give up the nationality or change your passport. That's just a factual thing. The psychological investment in that group is the problem. That makes that group not functional, not innocent. It's a psychological investment. That group can be Theosophy, it can be Krishnamurti group, it can be Christianity, whatever. You have taken a part of humanity, identified yourself with them, and you are deriving importance out of that. That's an ego process of identifying and deriving an identity and using that in your life to lead your life. And that's dangerous. That creates division in the world. So unless you free yourself of this psychological process, you can't do the other, namely make a larger and larger group, ultimately including the whole world and also the animals and plants and all of nature in it. The greatest sages have been those who said, I'm not a, Socrates said, I'm not a citizen of Greece, I am a world citizen. They realized that.
We have a question from Anshuman. Living actively in the world as opposed to renunciation of it, after learning about oneself and putting our own house in order, has the potential of generating a sense of spiritual pride or superiority, which is an egoic trait. After beginning our journey on the religious quest, while living in relationship with others in the society, as we notice the change in ourselves, how can we deal with the significant others who are not on the same journey and have not changed?
By realizing that the other man is yourself. He may have greater ignorance than you do, but there is ignorance in you too. If you are proud of your religiosity, even if it be the religiosity which Krishnamurti points out, that pride is the ego, is the identification with a certain ideation, with a certain group, and you are separating yourself. That's why I have often said that the division between so-called Krishnamurti groups and theosophical groups is not different from the division between Hindus and Muslims. It's psychologically the process by which this division arises is the process of identification, measuring, choosing, preferring one over the other, a kind of division. The division may not lead to physical warfare, but it leads to psychological warfare, an idea of alienation between that group and my group. So when Krishna says it is important to be nobody, that means nobody, no identification with any group. Doesn't mean you have no knowledge. Doesn't mean you don't have a nationality, you don't have a passport. It's not the factual side which is problematic. It's the psychological attachment, the psychological investment, the importance you derive from that identity. All that is still the ego. So that's why it's not simply a question of forming larger and larger groups, but it's a question of understanding what is an innocent functional group and what is a divisive group, and how does a group become divisive, and not to join a group that is divisive. Of course, you have to be part of a group because you have to function cooperatively with other human beings. Now, the other question of you see the other man's ignorance. Do you therefore dislike him? Or do you feel sympathetic? I'll give you a question. If you really stay with that question and explore it, a lot of understanding can devolve. You know, we are very sympathetic when a man is physically blind. We help him to cross the road. We bring him a chair to sit. We bring him food and help him. We feel great compassion for him. But when a man is mentally blind, why do we not feel the same compassion? Why do we hate him? Isn't the terrorist a man who is mentally blinded? His mind is trapped in propaganda. His ignorance is causing him to feel all that. But we hate the terrorist. We are willing to kill him because we are measuring by the effect of that. We are not looking at the psychological part. He was not born a terrorist. Poor fellow became a terrorist in our society. When you see the whole history, you feel compassion. When you see only his terminal action, which was cruel, you feel hatred. So hatred is born out of lack of holistic perception, only perceiving partially and then hating that, which is a process of measurement and judgment, and hatred comes out of that. So you can learn a lot by just staying with that question as to why do I feel sympathy for a man who is physically blind, but I feel anger towards a man who is mentally blind, man or woman.
So next we have a question from Renu Aurora. I will read the entire statement. We have a couple questions at the beginning and a statement at the end, and I can repeat the questions later if needed. Can one living the life of a yogi reduce his own corruption while living in society? What if all the schools can be taught this philosophy from childhood? Then maybe the next generations will learn to limit wars and gradually reduce or eliminate the thought of war over the next 20 years or 2 generations ahead. Thus, we could use yogic philosophy to become corruption-free, conscious, egoless, conscious to become religious and a religious global community.
I'm afraid, sir, it is not so simple. This problem cannot be solved through propaganda for a certain ideology or a certain opinion. The communists tried that for Marxism. It had failed. Learn from history and see that that doesn't work. Hitler said the only difference between a lie and a truth is in the number of times it has been repeated. There is truth in that statement. But see what he did. That Nazi propaganda, he kept on repeating, creating more and more division through propaganda. You cannot bring about goodness through propaganda. There is a certain amount of goodness which comes from conditioning. That you have to examine your conditioning and see which part of it is healthy, conducive to sensitivity and not try to end that. And which part of it is illusory, creates division, creates negative emotions, and you have to end that. All that is part of the work of self-knowledge. For example, if I take a child for a walk and I tell him, keep quiet, don't disturb those birds, let us just watch them, let us not disturb their life. I'm creating a certain sensitivity and respect for other life forms. It will condition the mind of that child, but that conditioning is sensitive. I can also condition him by saying, oh, get the gun. See if you can shoot one of those birds from this distance. What a good target for trying out your hunting. And I would have conditioned him into violence, into the importance of being a good shooter, and so on. So the conditioning there is some conditioning which produces sensitivity, there is other conditioning which produces bad emotions. And that's why it is important not to just discard all conditioning, but to examine it and to understand, to stay with that question long enough to know what part of it is healthy, normal, and what part is dangerous, divisive. Get free from it. But I'm afraid you cannot create goodness out of conditioning. The Christians tried it, no? The Roman Catholics have tried. They conditioned the mind into feeling remorse and feeling repentance whenever what they consider to be sin. It only produced a lot of self-condemnation, a conscience which pricks you all the time and so on. It's kind of inner policeman that is put inside you, which is watching you. That's also a way of controlling a human being. It's not freedom. So that didn't work either. You cannot do it through propaganda. I read Thought for the Day. I don't remember who wrote that, but I remember the quotation because it touched me. It said, people are not disturbed by what they see. They are disturbed by their opinion about it, which means the disturbance comes from within you. It's not you attribute it to what you are seeing to the outside, but actually the disturbance of the mind comes from within. When you go on a railway train, there is a lot of noise, but it doesn't disturb you. That noise, you ignore it. It becomes part of being. But elsewhere, you find noise which is troubling you. You will find that you yourself have an opinion that there should not be this noise. And therefore you are angry that there is that noise. That opinion creates the anger and the disturbance. So you have to learn this. You have to learn whether you can listen to a noise without reacting. And if you can listen to an outside noise, can you listen to the noise of your boss when he shouts at you in the same way? It's really important, sir, but very interesting if you are interested in learning about yourself. Very fascinating how our consciousness operates. That reminds me of another quotation which touched me. It says, life is not a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to be lived. Now, the mystery is something you explore in order to learn for yourself. Problem to be solved means you have bringing in your self-interest into it. You want it to be one way, not the other way. You're not just witness consciousness. You are participating in that with a choice. So Krishnaji talks about choiceless awareness. One has to go into all this very deeply, sir, and stay with the question. Only then you see. That's why a lot of attention is necessary, because the false and the true are often very close to each other. Attachment looks just like love outwardly. In the Gita, Arjuna asks a question of Krishna, the so-called divine being. What is this liberated man like? How does he sleep? How does he eat? How does he work? Tell me. And Krishna gives a long answer, which you can read in the Gita. But the essence of it, I understood, was that he sleeps like the ordinary man, he works like the ordinary man, he eats like the ordinary man. But it is not the same thing, because he doesn't do it for the same reasons. That means the motive is different, not that the action is different. And it is that motive with which you are acting which you need to watch. Watch without judgment, without saying it should not be there. And so just watch and see what that motive is doing in your life. Unless you watch long enough, you will quickly come to a conclusion which is false. But if you watch long enough, you will come to the truth about that particular question. But there are many such questions in life. So the learning continues. There is no end to this learning. Self-knowledge is not like a course in academics where the course ends. This is all about your own life. The whole of life, Krishnamurti says, the whole of life is a movement in learning. This kind of learning, what is true and what is false. And there is no such thing as permanent freedom, because all that it takes to constitute the ego is the instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, the capacity for imagination and language, and memory, all of which is present in every human being. So you can constitute the ego any moment. The sage can also constitute the ego, because he has all the three. He has all the tools for creating the ego. So it requires tremendous, continuous awareness not to step into the field of being egoistic, to remain with need and not enter the field of greed, which is just very close to it, to remain with love and not get into the field of attachment, to remain with wishes and not turn it into a desire. All that, there are these boundaries which you need to be aware of. That is part of wisdom. So wisdom makes your watching very perceptive and very safe. Without wisdom, it is not safe. You will mistake one thing for the other and come to wrong conclusions. That is illusion. That is why I said that without wisdom, it will always go wrong. You can't solve it just structurally or through propaganda.
We have a question from Samrish. Kay says, you have to become a disciple, not to somebody, but a disciple who is learning to see the disorder. In seeing that disorder, there is order. You don't have to do a thing, yet you have to work tremendously hard to look. What does he mean by working tremendously hard? Is there a suggestion to stay alert to your own patterns of thinking, being aware from moment to moment? I have seen from my personal quest that this needs practice, otherwise one gets carried away in thought.
You want to practice, you can practice, but the practice will not take you to the end. Every practice produces some result. That result you will get from that practice. If you do yoga, your body will become supple, but it will not bring virtue unless you have a deeper understanding of yoga. So there's nothing wrong in practicing. It is the illusion that is attached with the practice which is the problem. It's not wrong also to visit the church or go to a temple. You can see the beauty of the church, the silence of the ceremonies, the beauty of the ceremony, the music, enjoy it. But the thought that I am therefore becoming religious or virtuous, that's an illusion. You are not becoming religious, or you are enjoying what you are seeing. There's nothing wrong with enjoyment, but it's the illusion that corrupts it. You can go and pray in a temple. If you have no illusion attached to it, you're just paying your respects to an imaginary entity who you call as God. There's no problem in that. But the illusion that, and the begging in that, praying and so on, all that is done with self-interest to achieve an end. It is the self-interest which is the problem, not the action of what you're doing. If I have lost the question, you please ask me again. Sometimes that happens at my age.
No, I think this was good. We have a question from Shamal Rao. In Love Cannot Be Taught, Kay says that thought must be completely still, and then perhaps the constant can come to touch it. Meditation is perceiving these two as not duality. I request Professor Krishna to elaborate on two things. Number one, the word constant. And number two, the phrase not duality that Kay is referring to in the above message.
I think that he is suggesting that one needs to pay total attention to whatever one is engaged in without a motive, with both your heart and the mind. To do something enthusiastically, just for the joy of it, the love of it, the beauty of it. So beauty, joy, love, freedom, order, wisdom, truth, all become one particular state when you reach that understanding, when you reach that wisdom. They are not really separate things. Intelligence also is wisdom. They all seem separate to us because we are looking at it superficially. It is this superficial understanding which is the illusion, and it is that illusion which is creating the division. Some poets and other sages have also, not necessarily sages, but people who have gone deep into it, artists, have also made such statements. Truth is beauty and beauty is truth. That's all there is to know and all that you need to know. I think it was Keats who said that. I'm not saying Keats was a sage or was free and so on, but he had this perception. And we need to listen to him also. We need to listen to everybody and everything with a mind which is not identifying with opinions, but paying attention with heart and mind to listen. He mentions that, what he means by listening. And that is the hard work. The mind tends to get distracted because it has these ego concerns. It has its ambitions. It is deciding whether this is important or not important. Should I pay attention or not pay attention? And so on. That doesn't happen to a mind that is steady, that is constant. So it's a constancy that comes from absence of distraction. And the distraction is because of lack of freedom. Your conditioning is interfering, your ego is interfering, and so on. That's why freedom is necessary before you can come on truth. Freedom from all this conditioning and truth. Freedom is not absence of that thing. We have already gone into that. Freedom means it doesn't dominate. You are willing to drop it if you see it as false. Then you're free of it. But if you identify with it, you are not free of it. If you identify with your property, when your property goes up and down, your heart goes up and down with it. You're attached to it. And so also all attachment is like that. It's a form of slavery. And freedom from that slavery is more necessary than political freedom and so on. I mean, India wanted to become free of British rule. That's one kind of political freedom. But that's not freedom of the individual. You're still trapped in your own conditioning, your own habits and so on of mind. More the habits of mind being more important than habits of body. So there are different levels of freedom. Freedom from conditioning is not ending of the conditioning. Now that I was trained in physics and brought up in a theosophical family and so on, all that is sitting inside my brain. Let it sit. How can I erase that? It's not like something written on a blackboard which you can erase with a duster. So you can't end the conditioning, but you can examine it. You don't have to identify with it. You don't have to be attached to it. You don't have to give importance to it and feel proud of it. We need to be just aware and drop what is false in it, what is creating insensitivity, or not drop the healthy part. For instance, I was brought up to feel respect for my teachers and elders. I see no problem coming out of that. I'm still like that. Why should I change that? That's a form of sensitivity towards my teachers and my elders, which I noticed that it is not in the same measure in the West. It's okay to be different. It's a cultural difference. So, but it doesn't create a problem. So to watch your conditioning, be aware of the fact that your conditioning is different from the conditioning of your friend. Not judge it and compare and all that, but examine it and retain what is healthy in it and what is creating division and bad emotions and so on. That's the work. That's the hard work that Krishna ji is asking us to do. The hard work is to pay this attention with a learning mind, attention with heart and mind, full attention with a learning mind. That's the hard work.
Thank you very much, Professor Krishna. I would like to turn it over to Prasad.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a wonderful evening, wonderful. And we'll see you next week.
Sure.
Goodbye.
I didn't mention, are there some chapters that are left yet, which have been mentioned, or should I didn't think about that as to which chapters. Maybe I'll write that.
Yeah, so if you could,
I'll have to look at it for the next week, which chapters I want you. If something is left over from this, we'll take it up.
Okay.
Possible, yeah. But I will also write what new chapters we'll take up.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And also
Thank you.
one quick thing also, if anyone has any further questions, you can submit them to Prasad and he'll send them to Professor Krishna for answering.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, everyone.
You're
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.